picture a quaint English village saint, Mary Mead, buzzing with a literary festival's charm, until a celebrated author, Eleanor Vance, collapses, poisoned by a single sip of wine. Was it her publisher, desperate to protect his empire? A fan, consumed by obsession? The organizer, hiding financial ruin? Or a rival, burning with envy? Join Miss Marple as she unravels a web of secrets, where every glance hides a motive, and a discarded napkin reveals the truth. In this Agatha Christie-inspired mystery, no one is what they seem, and danger lurks in the heart of the festival. Chapter 1. The festival begins. The late summer sun cast a golden glow over St. Mary Mead, transforming the village green into a stage for the annual literary festival. An event as unexpected in this sleepy hamlet as a peacock in a henhouse. White tents adorned with cheerful bunting in a shades of crimson and gold, sprouted like mushrooms after rain, their flaps fluttering in the gentle breeze. Bookstalls lined the gravel paths, groaning under the weight of novels, biographies, and slim volumes of verse, while the air hummed with the chatter of book lovers, authors, and curious villagers. At the heart of it all stood a grand marquee, its interior draped with cream linen, where the festival's keynote speaker, Eleanor Vance, was to hold court. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a wicker chair just outside the tea tent, observed the bustle with her usual quiet acuity. Her knitting needles moved rhythmically, a soft click-clack accompanying her thoughts as she took in the scene. Her faded blue eyes, sharp behind their spectacles, missed nothing. The eager young woman clutching a stack of books to her chest, the harried festival organizer adjusting a microphone with trembling hands. The distinguished gentleman in a tweed suit frowning at a clipboard. The festival was a novelty for St. Mary Mead and Miss Marple, though no stranger to the ways of the world, found herself intrigued by the undercurrents of ambition and rivalry swirling beneath the surface. Eleanor Vance, the celebrated author of Whispers of Truth, was the festival's undeniable draw. Her latest novel, a biting satire of the literary world, had set tongues wagging with its thinly veiled portraits of publishers, critics, and fellow writers. At 42, Eleanor possessed a commanding presence, tall, with raven hair swept into an elegant chignon, and eyes that seemed to pierce through pretense. Her reputation for candour, bordering on cruelty, preceded her, and the marquee was packed with those eager to hear her speak. Miss Marple, who had read Whispers of Truth at the insistence of her nephew Raymond, noted its sharp wit, but also its potential to make enemies. A book like that, she had remarked to her maid Cherry, is bound to stir up trouble. As the clock struck 3, the crowd settled, and Eleanor ascended the small stage, her emerald dress catching the light. She held a glass of sparkling wine, raised in a toast, to the festival's success. "To stories," she said, her voice clear and resonant, "and the truths they unveil." The audience applauded, but Miss Marple's gaze darted to 4 figures in particular. Mr. Reginald Hurst, Eleanor's publisher, stood near the front, his broad face fixed in a smile that did not reach his eyes. Miss Clara Finch, a slight woman with a fervent expression, clutched a worn copy of Eleanor's book, her lips moving as if in silent prayer. Mrs. Lydia Price, the festival organizer, hovered at the edge of the stage, her hands twisting a handkerchief. And Mr. Julian Drake, a rival author, leaned against a tent pole, his handsome features marred by a faint sneer. Eleanor took a sip of her wine, her eyes scanning the crowd. Then, with a sudden gasp, she staggered, her hand flying to her throat. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the wooden platform with a sound like a gunshot. She crumpled to the ground, her dress pooling around her like spilled ink. The marquee erupted in chaos, gasps, shouts, and the scrape of chairs as people surged forward. Miss Marple remained seated, her knitting undisturbed, but her mind was already at work, cataloguing the reactions around her. Hurst's frozen stare, Clara's piercing cry, Lydia's frantic rush to the stage, and Drake's curious stillness. Dr. Haydock, the village physician, pushed through the crowd, his medical bag in hand. Kneeling beside Eleanor, he checked her pulse and examined her pallor. "She's alive," he announced, "but we need an ambulance." "This looks like poison." The word sent a ripple through the crowd, and Miss Marple's needles paused. Poison, she thought, was a deliberate act, requiring both opportunity and intent. As the wail of an ambulance siren approached, she rose, tucking her knitting into her bag. The festival, so bright and promising moments ago, had taken a dark turn, and Miss Marple knew that beneath the surface of St. Mary Mead's literary celebration lay a puzzle she was uniquely suited to solve. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime, the marquee, moments ago, a vibrant hub of literary anticipation, now resembled a stage struck by tragedy. The crowd's murmurs swelled into a cacophony of shock and speculation as Eleanor Vance lay motionless on the platform, her emerald dress stark against the polished wood. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting safely stowed, moved closer to the scene, her small figure unassuming amidst the chaos. Her eyes, sharp as ever, darted from the shattered glass at Eleanor's side to the faces of those nearest the stage. The air was thick with the scent of spilled wine and fear, and Miss Marple, with her quiet habit of observing human nature, sensed that the truth lay not in the obvious but in the subtle. The glance averted, the hand clenched, the breath held too long. Dr. Haydock, his face grim, worked swiftly, loosening Eleanor's collar and checking her vitals with practiced efficiency. "She's breathing, but barely," he muttered to a young constable who had pushed through the crowd. "We need that ambulance now." The wail of sirens grew louder, slicing through the village green's pastoral calm. Miss Marple noted the doctor's urgency, but also his certainty. Poison, he had said with no hesitation. Aconite, perhaps, or something equally swift and insidious. She had read of such things in her nephew Raymond's detective novels, though she preferred to trust her own observations over fictional flourishes. Inspector Craddock arrived promptly, his lean frame cutting through the throng with authority. A familiar figure to Miss Marple from past cases, he was a man of method, though not without imagination. He nodded to her, a flicker of respect in his eyes, before turning to the scene. "Clear the area, please," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. Constables began herding the crowd back, their notebooks already open to record statements. Miss Marple, permitted to remain due to her reputation and Craddock's trust, stood near the edge of the platform, her gaze sweeping the marquee's interior. The refreshment table, positioned to the left of the stage, drew her attention. It was a simple affair, draped in white linen and laden with a silver tray of sparkling wine glasses, their contents glinting in the afternoon light. One glass, now shattered at Eleanor's feet, had held the poison. Doctor. Haydock's diagnosis left little doubt. Miss Marple stepped closer, careful not to disturb the scene. The grass beneath the platform was damp with spilled wine, its sharp tang mingling with the earthy scent of the village green. She noted the tray's arrangement. A dozen glasses, all identical, save for the one Eleanor had chosen. Had it been marked in some way? Or had the poisoner known which glass she would take? Craddock joined her, his notebook in hand. "Miss Marple, your thoughts?" he asked, his tone low. He valued her insights, though he sometimes found her methods, rooted in village parallels and human quirks, unconventional. "It's a curious thing, Inspector," she replied, her voice soft but precise. "Poison is so personal, isn't it? To tamper with a single glass suggests not only intent, but knowledge of the victim's habits. Whoever did this was close to the scene, and bold Craddock nodded, his eyes scanning the table. The caterer swears the wine was poured from sealed bottles, and the volunteers insist no one tampered with the glasses. But someone did. He gestured to a constable, who was collecting the remaining glasses for analysis. "We'll test them all, but I suspect only hers was tainted." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the tray. "And who poured the wine, Inspector?" "Who handed her the glass?" Craddock consulted his notes. "Mrs. Lydia Price, the festival organizer, oversaw the refreshments. She said she placed the tray backstage herself, and a volunteer, a Miss Emily Watson, carried it to the stage just before the speech." Eleanor took her glass directly from the tray. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "Mrs. Price, you say? And was the tray ever left unattended?" Craddock's brow furrowed. "Briefly, it seems. Miss Watson set it down backstage while adjusting the stage curtains. A matter of minutes, but enough time for someone to act." "Minutes," Miss Marple mused, "are often all it takes." She turned her attention to the crowd, now gathered outside the marquis's entrance, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Among them, she spotted the 4 individuals who had caught her eye earlier. Each, she sensed, held a piece of the puzzle. Mr. Reginald Hurst, Eleanor's publisher, stood near a bookstall, his broad frame rigid as he spoke to a constable. His tweed suit was impeccable, but his hands betrayed him, fidgeting with a gold pocket watch. Miss Marple recalled his tight smile during Eleanor's toast, a smile that seemed more obligation than warmth. His publishing house, Hurst & Sons, had profited handsomely from whispers of truth, but the book's scandalous content had stirred trouble. Whispers in the village suggested lawsuits loomed, and Hurst's firm could ill afford such a blow. Had he feared Eleanor's next move, or was there more to his unease? Miss Clara Finch hovered at the crowd's edge, her slight figure dwarfed by the bustle around her. Her mouse-brown hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her eyes, red-rimmed, darted toward the marquis. She still clutched her copy of Whispers of Truth, its cover worn from constant handling. Miss Marple had seen such devotion before, adoration that could curdle into something darker if betrayed. Clara's fervour for Eleanor was palpable, but had it driven her to act? Her presence in the crowd during the speech seemed certain, yet Miss Marple wondered what had passed between fan and idol in private. Mrs. Lydia Price, the festival organizer, was directing volunteers near the marquis's entrance, her voice sharp with strain. Her auburn hair, usually neatly pinned, was coming loose, and her hands twisted a handkerchief into knots. The festival was her creation, a bid to put St. Mary Mead on the literary map, but its success hung by a thread. Eleanor's collapse threatened to unravel everything. Miss Marple noted Lydia's agitation, so different from her usual composure. Had she been careless with the drinks, or worse, complicit? Her role backstage gave her access, but what motive could she have? Mr. Julian Drake leaned against a nearby lamppost, his posture languid, but his eyes alert. A once celebrated novelist, his star had dimmed as Eleanor's rose. His latest book, a ponderous historical epic, had been eclipsed by whispers of truth, which many believed mocked him in its pages. His dark hair was streaked with silver, and his smile, when it appeared, held a bitter edge. Miss Marple had overheard him at the pub the previous evening, dismissing Eleanor's work as sensationalist tripe. Had his resentment boiled over into action? His presence near the refreshment tent earlier in the day lingered in her mind. As the ambulance arrived and medics rushed to Eleanor's side, Miss Marple stepped back, allowing Craddock to direct the scene. The medics worked swiftly, stabilizing Eleanor before carrying her to the vehicle. Dr. Haydock followed, his face set. "She'll pull through, I hope," he said to Craddock, "but the poison was potent." "Aconite, I'd wager, from the symptoms: rapid onset, convulsions, respiratory distress." Miss Marple's mind turned to aconite, a poison she knew from village lore and her own reading. Derived from the monkshood plant, it was swift and deadly, requiring only a small dose. Its use suggested knowledge, perhaps even premeditation. She recalled the village gardener, Mr. Pym, warning children away from monkshood in his borders. Could the poisoner have sourced it locally? Or had they brought it, prepared for this moment? Craddock, meanwhile, was questioning the volunteers. Miss Emily Watson, a nervous girl of 19, recounted her role. "I poured the wine from the bottles, Mrs. Price provided," she said, her voice trembling. "I set the tray backstage, then went to fix the curtains. When I returned, I carried the tray to the stage, and Miss Vance took her glass herself." "And you saw no one near the tray?" Craddock pressed. Emily hesitated. "It was hectic, people moving about, setting up chairs. I didn't notice anyone in particular." Miss Marple, standing nearby, interjected gently. "And the glasses, Miss Watson, were they all the same?" Emily nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Standard flutes, all from the caterer." "I didn't see anything odd about them," Miss Marple thanked her, her mind racing. If the glasses were identical, how had the poisoner ensured Eleanor took the tainted one? Had it been placed deliberately, or was it a matter of chance? She glanced at the platform, where a constable was photographing the shattered glass. The shards glinted in the sunlight, and she noted their distribution, scattered, as if dropped in haste. A faint stain on the wood caught her eye, barely visible against the grain. She made a mental note to mention it to Craddock. The inspector, meanwhile, was organizing his team. "We'll need statements from everyone backstage," he said, "and a list of who had access to the tent before the speech. Miss Marple, will you assist? Your knack for details is unmatched." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Of course, Inspector. I shall do my best." Her tone was modest, but her mind was already weaving connections, drawing on her years of observing village life. People, she knew, were much the same everywhere, driven by pride, fear, or envy. The festival, with its glittering surface, was no different from St. Mary Mead's drawing rooms or church bazaars. Somewhere in this tangle of motives and opportunities lay the truth. She turned her attention to the suspects again, each a distinct thread in the pattern. Hurst, with his financial stake in Eleanor's success, seemed an unlikely poisoner. Why kill the goose that laid the golden eggs? Yet his nervousness suggested secrets. Clara's devotion was intense, almost alarming, but poison required calculation, not passion. Lydia's role gave her opportunity, but her distress seemed genuine, unless it was a performance. Drake, with his cool detachment and literary grudge, intrigued her most. His knowledge of Eleanor's habits, gained from years in the same circles, could have guided his hand. As the crowd dispersed, shepherded by constables, Miss Marple lingered by the refreshment table. She pictured the moments before the speech. The tray set down, the bustle of volunteers, the brief window of chaos. Someone had moved swiftly, unnoticed, to tamper with a single glass. The act required nerve and precision, qualities she associated with a mind both desperate and cunning. She thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry, who once remarked that the quietest people often held the deepest grudges. Was that true here? Craddock approached, his expression thoughtful. The lab will confirm the poison, but we're dealing with a deliberate act. Whoever did this knew Eleanor would take that glass. Any ideas? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Not yet, Inspector, but I find it helpful to consider the little things. A glance, a gesture, a moment's hesitation. People reveal themselves in such ways, don't they? Craddock smiled wryly. You see more in a glance than most see in a confession. I'll have the suspects brought to the village hall tomorrow. Will you join us? I should be delighted, she replied, her voice mild but her mind alert. As she walked back to her cottage, the festival's lights fading behind her, Miss Marple felt the familiar stir of a puzzle taking shape. The poisoner had struck in plain sight, trusting the crowd to shield them. But Miss Marple knew that crowds, like villages, held no secrets from those who watched closely. The scene of the crime was set, and she was ready to unravel its mysteries, one stitch at a time. Chapter 3. The Publisher's Motive. The morning after the festival's dramatic opening dawned crisp and clear, with a mist lingering over St. Mary Mead's meadows, as if the village itself were holding its breath. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, a cup of tea steaming beside her, her knitting needles idle for once, as she pondered the events of the previous day. The news of Eleanor Vance's poisoning had spread like wildfire, and the village buzzed with speculation, from the post office to the butcher's shop. Miss Marple, however, preferred facts to gossip, though she knew the latter often held kernels of truth. Today she would begin untangling the threads, starting with Mr. Reginald Hurst, Eleanor's publisher, whose strained smile had lingered in her memory. She arranged to meet Hurst at the vicarage, a neutral ground where the Reverend Clement's kindly presence ensured discretion. The vicarage, with its sagging beams and rose-patterned curtains, was a comforting contrast to the festival's frenetic energy. Hurst arrived promptly at 11, his tweed suit slightly rumpled, a faint sheen of perspiration on his brow despite the cool morning. He carried a leather briefcase, which he set down with a thud, as if it bore the weight of his troubles. Miss Marple greeted him with her usual courtesy, offering tea and a plate of Cherry's shortbread, which he accepted with a distracted nod. "Mr. Hurst," she began, her voice gentle but probing, "you must be dreadfully shaken by yesterday's events. Miss Vance is such a valued author for your firm." Hurst's fingers tightened around his teacup. "Shaken, yes, Miss Marple. It's a terrible business. Eleanor's a brilliant writer, but her work attracts controversy. This poisoning, ghastly. I can't imagine who'd do such a thing. Miss Marple's eyes, mild behind her spectacles, noted his quick deflection. Indeed, her latest book, Whispers of Truth, has caused quite a stir, hasn't it? I understand it's been a great success for Hurst and Sons, though perhaps not without complication. Hurst shifted in his chair, his broad face flushing. A success, yes. Sold out its first print run in a week. But the book's candid nature has ruffled feathers. Some in the industry took offence at her portrayals. Pure fiction, of course, but people see themselves in it, don't they? We've had letters threatening legal action. Nothing serious, mind you, just bluster. Miss Marple tilted her head, her knitting now in her lap as a prop for thought. Legal action can be costly, even if it's bluster. I imagine your firm relies heavily on Miss Vance's success. Losing her would be a blow, would it not? Hurst's eyes narrowed, but he forced a laugh. Lose her? Good heavens, no. Eleanor's our star. Why, we've just signed her for a 3-book deal. She's not going anywhere. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene. How fortunate! Though I did hear in passing that her contract includes a clause allowing her to leave if sales don't meet expectations. Village talk, you know, but one does hear things. Hurst's hand jerked, spilling a drop of tea onto his cuff. He dabbed at it with a handkerchief, his movements jerky. Village talk, as you say, Miss Marple. Contracts are complex, but Eleanor's committed to us. No need for anyone to worry about her leaving. Miss Marple nodded, as if satisfied, but her mind was cataloguing his unease. She recalled a conversation overheard at the festival's bookstall, where a clerk had mentioned Hurst arguing with Eleanor about revising Whispers of Truth to soften its barbs. Had he feared her defiance would cost him more than sales? She changed tack, her tone conversational. You were at the festival all day, I presume. Such a busy time for a publisher. Hurst relaxed slightly, seizing the safer topic. Oh yes, meeting booksellers, signing contracts, shaking hands. I was with a group from London, reputable chaps, when Eleanor gave her speech. They'll vouch for me. I'm sure they will, Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. And before the speech, you were near the refreshment tent, perhaps, ensuring all was in order. Hurst's flush deepened. I may have passed by. Lydia, Mrs. Price, asked me to check the setup. Publishers often lend a hand at these events, nothing unusual. Miss Marple's needles clicked once, a deliberate pause. Nothing unusual at all. Though it must be trying. Managing an author as spirited as Miss Vance. Her independence, her boldness, qualities that make her books so compelling, yet perhaps challenging for a publisher. Hurst's jaw tightened, but he managed a weak smile. She's a handful, I'll grant you. But worth it. Her books sell, and that's what matters. Miss Marple let the silence linger, a technique she'd honed over years of village inquiries. Hurst fidgeted, glancing at his watch. I should be going, he said, rising. The police will want my statement, and I've meetings to reschedule. Of course, Miss Marple said, escorting him to the door. Thank you for your time, Mr. Hurst. Do take care. As he left, Miss Marple returned to her chair, her mind sifting through their exchange. Hurst's alibi seemed solid. Booksellers could confirm his whereabouts during the speech, but his nervousness betrayed a deeper concern. She thought of her neighbour, Mr. Simmons, who once concealed a debt by boasting of his prosperity. People, she knew, often hid their fears behind bravado. Hurst's stake in Eleanor's success was clear, but what if she'd threatened to expose something more damaging than fictional slights? A financial irregularity, perhaps? Or a professional slight? She made a note to ask Inspector Craddock about Hurst's firm. Had there been whispers of mismanagement? Her thoughts drifted to the refreshment tent, where Hurst admitted to being before the speech. The tray of glasses, unattended for those crucial minutes, offered opportunity. But poison required more than opportunity. Knowledge, access, and a steady hand. Did Hurst possess such qualities? Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt, and stepped into the vicarage garden, where the Reverend Clement was pruning roses. "A troubling business, Jane," he said, looking up. "Poison at a literary festival, hardly what one expects in Saint." Mary Mead. "Trouble, Vicar, finds its way everywhere," she replied, her tone light, but her eyes distant. "It's only a matter of looking closely to see it." She returned to her cottage, her mind turning to the other suspects. Clara Finch, with her fervent devotion, awaited her next. Miss Marple knew that obsession could twist even the gentlest heart, and Clara's intensity was a thread worth pulling. As she prepared for their meeting, she felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle unfolding, each clue a stitch in a pattern only she could discern. Chapter 4. The Fan's Devotion. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak table where she sat, a pot of Earl Grey cooling beside her. The events of the literary festival lingered in her mind, each detail a thread in the intricate tapestry of human motives she was beginning to weave. Her conversation with Mr. Hurst had revealed a man under pressure, his composure fraying like an old hem. But now her thoughts turned to Clara Finch, the ardent fan whose devotion to Eleanor Vance bordered on reverence. Miss Marple knew that such intensity could be a double-edged sword. Love could inspire loyalty, but also resentment if unreciprocated. She had arranged to meet Clara at the village tea-room, a cosy establishment run by Mrs. Baker, where the clink of china and the murmur of gossip provided a perfect backdrop for quiet observation. Clara arrived promptly, her slight figure almost swallowed by an oversized cardigan, her mouse-brown hair pinned back with a plain clip. In her arms, she clutched a dog-eared copy of Whispers of Truth, its cover creased from countless readings. Her eyes, wide and faintly red, darted nervously as she sat across from Miss Marple, who offered a warm smile and a plate of scones. "Miss Finch," she began, her voice as soothing as the tea she poured. "You must be dreadfully upset about Miss Vance. I understand you're one of her greatest admirers." Clara's fingers tightened around the book, her knuckles whitening. "She's everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Her words, they speak to me. They understand things, pain, loneliness, that no one else does. When I read her, it's like she sees me." Her eyes glistened, and she blinked rapidly, as if embarrassed by her emotion. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle sympathy. She had seen such fervour before in the young women of St. Mary Mead, who idolized film stars or local heroes, their devotion sometimes blinding them to reality. "It must be wonderful to feel so connected to an author," she said. "Have you met Miss Vance before?" "Perhaps at one of her signings." Clara's cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her lap. Once, last year, at a bookshop in Much Benham, I gave her a gift, a bookmark I made myself, with pressed flowers. She smiled and thanked me. It was perfect. Her voice faltered, and she clutched the book closer, as if it were a talisman. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving Clara's face. How lovely! And at the festival, did you have a chance to speak with her again? I saw you in the crowd, so eager to hear her speak. Clara's gaze flickered, and she hesitated before answering. I wanted to. I had another gift for her, a new bookmark. I waited by the marquee before her speech, hoping to catch her, but she was so busy, I didn't want to bother her. Her voice trembled, and she fumbled with the edge of her cardigan. Then she collapsed and, oh, it was awful. Miss Marple's needles resting in her lap clicked once, a subtle punctuation to her thoughts. She noted Clara's hesitation, the way her hands shook as she spoke of the festival. You were in the crowd during her speech, weren't you? Such a terrible moment to witness. Did you stay near the stage afterward? Clara nodded quickly. Yes, I was right at the front. I couldn't believe it when she fell. I wanted to help, but there were so many people, and then the doctor came. I stayed until the police told us to leave. Her words tumbled out, as if eager to prove her presence. Miss Marple smiled, her tone reassuring. Of course. It must have been overwhelming. And before the speech, when you were waiting to give her your gift, did you notice anything unusual near the refreshment tent? People coming and going, perhaps? Clara's eyes widened, and she shook her head. I wasn't near the tent. I was by the marquee entrance, waiting for Eleanor, Miss Vance. I didn't see anything odd, just the usual festival bustle. Her voice was earnest, but her fingers twisted a loose thread on her cardigan, unravelling it slightly. Miss Marple made a mental note of Clara's insistence on her distance from the tent. She thought of Mrs. Tuttle, a village spinster who once swore she'd never visited the churchyard where her rival's roses were trampled, only to be betrayed by a muddy shoe. Small details, Miss Marple knew, often spoke louder than words. You're so devoted to Miss Vance, she said, her tone conversational. Have you written to her, perhaps? Fans often do. I hear Clara's flush deepened, and she looked away. A few letters, she admitted, just to tell her how much her books mean to me. She wrote back once, a short note. I keep it in my room. Her voice held a mix of pride and shyness, but Miss Marple detected a hint of longing, as if the single reply had not been enough. That's very special, Miss Marple said, her eyes softening, though I imagine it can be hard, loving someone's work so much and not always hearing back. It might feel like a slight, even if it's not meant that way. Clara's lips parted, as if to protest, but she closed them again. She's busy, she said finally. I know she can't answer every letter. I don't mind. But her eyes, glistening again, suggested otherwise. Miss Marple let the silence settle, her mind turning over Clara's words. Devotion could breed expectation, and expectation, when unmet, could fester. She recalled a young maid in St. Mary Mead who had turned spiteful when her beau ignored her letters. Could Clara's adoration have soured into something darker? Her presence at the marquee entrance placed her near the scene, though not at the refreshment tent. Yet her trembling hands and quick denials suggested fear or guilt. As they finished their tea, Miss Marple glanced at the book in Clara's arms. "Might I see your copy of Whispers of Truth?" she asked. "I've heard so much about it." Clara hesitated, then handed it over, her fingers lingering as if reluctant to part with it. Miss Marple turned the pages gently, noting the underlined passages and marginal notes in Clara's neat hand. One page, near the novel's climax, bore a single word scribbled in pencil: betrayed. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly, but she closed the book and returned it with a smile. "A treasure, clearly," she said. "Thank you for sharing it." Clara clutched the book again, her expression a mix of relief and wariness. "I should go," she said, rising. "I promised to help at the festival clean-up." "Of course," Miss Marple said, escorting her to the door. "Do take care, Miss Finch. And thank you for your time." As Clara left, Miss Marple returned to her seat, her mind sifting through the encounter. Clara's devotion was genuine, but her hesitation and the word betrayed hinted at a deeper wound. Had Eleanor's failure to reciprocate her admiration sparked resentment? Or was Clara simply a nervous soul, overwhelmed by the tragedy? Miss Marple thought of the refreshment tent, the tray of glasses, and the fleeting window of opportunity. Clara claimed she was nowhere near it, but her proximity to the marquee placed her close enough to act, if she had reason. She made a note to ask Inspector Craddock about Clara's movements. A neighbour had confirmed seeing her in the crowd, but had anyone noticed her earlier, perhaps slipping backstage? Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the villager's Miss Weatherby, whose obsession with a local poet had led to petty vandalism when her letters went unanswered. People, she mused, could be so fragile when their idols failed them. Outside, the tea-room's chatter continued, and Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her fingers moving automatically as her mind worked. Clara Finch was a puzzle piece, but the picture was far from complete. Mrs. Lydia Price, the festival organizer, awaited her next, and Miss Marple sensed that her agitation held clues of its own. As she stepped into the afternoon light, the village green still dotted with festival tents, she felt the familiar pull of a mystery unfolding, each conversation a step closer to the truth. Chapter 5. The Organizer's Burden. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across St. Mary Mead's village hall, where the literary festival's remnants, stacked chairs, rolled banners, and stray programs spoke of a celebration cut short. Miss Jane Marple, her black lace shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The hall smelled of polished wood and wilting flowers, a reminder of the previous day's chaos. She had arranged to meet Mrs. Lydia Price, the festival organizer, here, where the bustle of clean-up would provide a natural setting for their conversation. Miss Marple knew that people often revealed more when distracted by mundane tasks, their guards lowered like curtains left ajar. Mrs. Price was already there, directing a pair of volunteers with a clipboard in hand. Her auburn hair, usually pinned with precision, straggled from its bun, and her tailored jacket hung unevenly as if donned in haste. Her face, flushed with exertion, bore the strain of a woman carrying more than the weight of folded tables. When she saw Miss Marple, she managed a tight smile, setting her clipboard aside. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to come," she said, her voice clipped but polite. "I'm afraid it's a bit of a mess here, with everything that's happened." "No trouble at all, Mrs. Price," Miss Marple replied, her tone warm as she settled into a chair near a window. "You've had a dreadful shock with Miss Vance's collapse. It must be terribly trying. Managing all this, Lydia's hands twisted together, her fingers knotting like the handkerchief Miss Marple had seen her clutching at the festival. "Trying doesn't begin to cover it," she said, sinking into a chair opposite. "This festival was meant to put Saint Mary Mead on the map, our little moment of glory. Now it's a scandal. People are cancelling their bookings, and the sponsors are furious." She paused, her eyes darting to the volunteers, who were stacking chairs at the far end of the hall. Miss Marple followed her glance, noting the tension in her posture. "It's a great responsibility, organising such an event," she said, her needles clicking softly as she drew her knitting from her bag. "Everything must be perfect. The speakers, the books, the refreshments. I imagine you checked the wine yourself, to ensure it was just right." Lydia's flush deepened, and she nodded. "Of course. I ordered the sparkling wine from a reputable caterer in Much Benham. Sealed bottles, poured by volunteers I trust. I supervised the setup myself. Glasses, trays, everything. I can't understand how this happened." Her voice rose, a note of defensiveness creeping in. Miss Marple's eyes, mild but piercing, studied her. "How distressing. And you were backstage, I believe, when Miss Vance took her glass. Adjusting the microphones, perhaps?" "Yes, exactly," Lydia said quickly. "I was making sure the sound was clear for Eleanor's speech. It's my job to keep things running smoothly. I didn't see anything unusual." Her fingers plucked at a loose thread on her skirt, and Miss Marple noted the gesture, so like Clara Finch's nervous habit. "It must have been a hectic moment," Miss Marple said, her tone conversational. "All those people milling about, volunteers, authors, guests, and the tray of glasses left unattended for a short while. I understand." Lydia's eyes flickered, and she hesitated before answering. Only for a moment. "Emily Watson, she's one of my volunteers, set the tray down while she fixed the curtains. I was nearby, but, well, it was chaotic. I didn't notice anyone tampering with anything." Her voice faltered, and she looked away, toward the window. Miss Marple's needles paused, a deliberate pause to let the silence work. She thought of Mrs. Eldridge, a village matron who once overlooked a pilfered cake at a fete, too distracted by her duties to notice the culprit. Lydia's agitation suggested more than mere oversight. "You've done wonders with this festival," Miss Marple said, changing tack. "It can't be easy, managing such a large event, especially with so much at stake." "I hear it's quite an investment for the village." Lydia's lips pressed into a thin line. "It is. My husband and I put everything into this, our savings, our reputation. If it fails, we're ruined. The sponsors expect results, and Eleanor's collapse." She trailed off, her hands clenching. "It's a disaster." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic. "How dreadful." And Miss Vance's book, with its provocative content, must have added to the pressure. "Did you know her well before the festival?" Lydia shook her head. "Not personally. We corresponded about her appearance, of course. She was demanding, specific about her schedule, her accommodations, but that's to be expected with someone of her stature. I wanted her here because she draws crowds. Her book was the talk of the literary world. Indeed, Miss Marple said, her voice soft, though I imagine some found its content unsettling. Did anyone, Mr. Hurst perhaps, or Mr. Drake, express concerns about her speech?" Lydia's eyes narrowed slightly, and she hesitated again. Mr. Hurst mentioned the book's controversies, but he was keen to promote it. Mr. Drake, well, He wasn't thrilled to be here, not with Eleanor as the star. He made a few sharp comments about her work, but nothing specific. Her tone was guarded, and Miss Marple sensed she was holding something back. She leaned forward slightly, her knitting idle. "And you, Mrs. Price, you must have read Whispers of Truth. Did you find it troubling?" Lydia's hands stilled, and she met Miss Marple's gaze for a moment before looking away. "It's a bold book." Eleanor doesn't shy away from hard truths. "But it's fiction, isn't it? I didn't take it personally." Her voice was steady, but her fingers resumed their restless twisting. Miss Marple smiled, as if satisfied, but her mind was racing. Lydia's role gave her unparalleled access to the refreshment tent, and her insistence on supervising the wine suggested a meticulous nature. Yet her agitation hinted at more than professional. Worry Miss Marple thought of Mrs. Harmon, the vicar's wife, who once concealed a financial strain behind her cheerful hosting of a church bazaar. Could Lydia's festival be masking similar troubles? As the volunteers finished their tasks and left the hall, Miss Marple rose, tucking her knitting away. "You've been most helpful, Mrs. Price," she said. "I do hope the festival recovers from this shock." "It's such a credit to your efforts." Lydia managed a wan smile. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I just want this nightmare to end." As Miss Marple stepped into the fading light, she reflected on their exchange. Lydia's defensiveness, her quick answers about the wine, and her hesitation when asked about Drake suggested a woman under strain, perhaps hiding more than she admitted. The festival's financial stakes were high, and Eleanor's collapse threatened ruin. Had Lydia acted to protect her investment, or was she merely a victim of circumstance? Miss Marple made a mental note to ask Inspector Craddock about Lydia's husband. Rumours of his debts had reached the village grapevine. She also recalled Lydia's proximity to the refreshment tent, her hands arranging the glasses. Opportunity was there, but motive remained elusive. As she walked toward her cottage, the village green quiet under the lengthening shadows, Miss Marple felt the puzzle tightening, each suspect a knot to be unravelled. Julian Drake, with his bitter rivalry, awaited her next, and she sensed his cool exterior hid a fire that might illuminate the truth. Chapter 6. The Rival's Envy. The evening air carried a chill as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the Blue Boar St. Mary Mead's sole pub, where the clink of glasses and low hum of conversation offered a stark contrast to the village hall's sombre aftermath. The Blue Boar, with its low beams and flickering firelight, was a place where secrets often slipped out over a pint, and Miss Marple had chosen it deliberately for her meeting with Mr. Julian Drake, Eleanor Vance's rival. She knew that envy, like a weed, could choke even the most polished exterior, and Drake's cool disdain at the festival had piqued her curiosity. Settling into a corner table, her knitting bag at her side, she awaited his arrival, her eyes scanning the room for familiar faces. Drake entered with a languid grace, his dark coat draped over one arm, his silver-streaked hair catching the lamplight. He was a man of 45, handsome in a weathered way, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to weigh every word before it was spoken. He spotted Miss Marple and offered a thin smile, sliding into the seat opposite her. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but edged with irony, "I'm told you're assisting the police." A village sleuth. How charming Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. Merely an observer, mister. Drake, she replied, her tone mild. I find people fascinating, especially those with stories to... Telling you, I understand, are quite a storyteller yourself. Drake's smile tightened, and he signalled for a whisky. I was once. Not so much now, thanks to the likes of Eleanor Vance and her sensationalist drivel. He leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. But I suppose you want to talk about her misfortune. Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly as she drew them from her bag. It was a dreadful shock, her collapse. You were at the festival, of course, signing books, I believe. Drake's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. At my stall, yes. Trying to move a few copies of the Crimson Veil. Not that anyone cared, with Eleanor holding court. His tone dripped with bitterness, and he took a sip of his whisky, his gaze distant. Miss Marple's needles paused, a deliberate pause to draw his attention. It must be difficult, seeing another author shine so brightly. Whispers of Truth has caused quite a stir. I hear it contains characters some find familiar. Drake's laugh was sharp, like the crack of a twig. Familiar? Oh, she didn't bother with subtlety. There's a washed-up novelist in that book. Petty, vain, a has-been. Sound like anyone you know. He gestured to himself, his smile a mix of mockery and pain. She made a career out of mocking her betters. I wasn't the only one she targeted, but I felt it most. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of gentle curiosity. That must have stung, especially given your own success in years past. Did you ever speak to her about it? Drake's fingers stilled on his glass. Once, at a writers' conference 2 years ago. I told her she'd gone too far, dragging personal grudges into her work. She laughed it off, said it was artistic license. I let it go. Public spats only fuel her fame. He shrugged, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of anger. Miss Marple nodded, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. How wise! And at the festival, were you near the marquee before her speech? I saw you by the refreshment tent earlier in the day. Such a busy place, with all those glasses being prepared. Drake's gaze sharpened, and he leaned forward, his voice low. You're fishing, Miss Marple. Yes, I was near the tent, chatting with a bookseller about my stock. But I wasn't backstage, if that's what you're implying. I was at my stall when Eleanor took her dram of poison. His tone was defiant, but his fingers resumed their drumming, a restless tick. Miss Marple's smile remained serene. Of course, Mr. Drake. I only wondered, as you know the literary world so well. You must be familiar with its intricacies. Even poisons, perhaps. I recall your novel, The Viper's Kiss, had a rather detailed description of a poisoning. Drake's laugh was drier this time, almost a cough. Research, Miss Marple. Writers do it all the time. I read about aconite for that book. Nasty stuff, quick and quiet. But I don't carry vials of it in my pocket, if that's what you're getting at. He drained his whisky, setting the glass down with a clink. I had no love for Eleanor, but I'm no murderer. Miss Marple's eyes softened, as if accepting his words, but her mind was cataloguing his every gesture. She thought of Mr. Grayson, a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper who once masked his resentment of a rival with jovial banter, only to sabotage their stock. Drake's polished exterior hid a similar bitterness, and his knowledge of poisons was no mere coincidence. You're very candid, Mr. Drake, she said. It must be trying, competing in such a small world. Did you notice anything unusual at the festival? Anyone near the refreshment tent who seemed out of place?" Drake hesitated, his eyes flicking to the fire. "It was a crowd, people everywhere. I saw Hurst fussing about, as usual. Lydia Price was barking orders, and that odd little fan, Clara something, was hovering like a moth. But nothing struck me as suspicious." His tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple noted the quick mention of the others, as if to shift focus. She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. "And Miss Vance's glass. Did you see how she came to choose it?" "The tray was brought out just before her speech, I believe." Drake's fingers paused, and he met her gaze. "I wasn't watching her every move. I was at my stall, as I said. The police have my statement. Ask them." His voice held a note of irritation, and he rose, adjusting his coat. "I've answered your questions, Miss Marple. I have a train to catch tomorrow, so if you'll excuse me." Miss Marple inclined her head, her smile unwavering. "Thank you, Mr. Drake. You've been most helpful. Safe travels." As he left, the pub's warmth seemed to dim, and Miss Marple sat back, her knitting idle. Drake's bitterness was palpable, his envy a motive as old as Cain. His alibi, signing books at his stall, could be checked. But his earlier presence near the refreshment tent placed him tantalizingly close to opportunity. His knowledge of aconite, gleaned from research, was no crime, but it suggested a mind capable of planning such an act. She thought of the village's mister, Tuttle, whose jealousy of a rival gardener led to a poisoned rose bush. Envy, she knew, could drive even the most cultured to desperate acts. Miss Marple gathered her things and stepped into the evening chill, the blue boar's lights fading behind her. Drake's cool demeanour had cracked, if only slightly, under her gentle probing. She made a note to ask Inspector Craddock about the witness who saw Drake near the tent. Had they noticed his cufflinks, perhaps, or any odd behaviour? As she walked toward her cottage, the village silent under a starlit sky, she felt the puzzle's edges sharpening. Each suspect held a piece, but Drake's resentment burned brightest. The next thread, she knew, would lead her deeper into the hour's tangle of motives, and she was ready to follow it. Chapter 7. The Poison's Path. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead cloaking the village in a gauzy veil that softened the outlines of its thatched cottages and ancient oaks. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage window, her knitting in her lap, though her needles lay still as she gazed out at the damp garden. The events of the literary festival, now 2 days past, occupied her thoughts, each suspect a distinct thread in the intricate pattern she was weaving. The poison, aconite, as doctor. Haydock had suspected, had cast a shadow over the village, and Miss Marple knew that its path, from vial to glass, held the key to unmasking the culprit. Her conversations with Hurst, Clara, Lydia, and Drake had revealed motives and opportunities, but the mechanics of the crime remained elusive. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie, and Cherry, her maid, ushered in Inspector Craddock, his face set with the weary determination of a man grappling with a stubborn case. "Miss Marple," he said, settling into a chintz-covered chair, "the lab results are in." It's aconite, as Haydock thought. A lethal dose, dissolved in the wine. Only Eleanor's glass was tainted. The others on the tray were clean. Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained serene. "Aconite," she murmured, her fingers brushing the wool in her lap. "Such a deliberate choice, Inspector." Swift, silent, and requiring only a small amount. Whoever used it knew precisely what they were doing. Craddock nodded, flipping open his notebook. The caterer's bottles were untainted, and the volunteers swear no one tampered with the glasses while they were poured. The tray was set backstage about 10 minutes before the speech, left unattended for perhaps 3 minutes, while Miss Watson adjusted the curtains. "That's our window." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. 3 minutes, she said, her voice soft. "Not long, but enough for a steady hand." And the glass? How did the poisoner ensure Miss Vance took the right one? Craddock frowned, tapping his pen. That's the puzzle. The glasses were identical, no markings. Eleanor took hers directly from the tray when Miss Watson brought it to the stage. Either the poisoner got lucky, or they knew her habits. Miss Marple's needles clicked once, a punctuation to her thoughts. She recalled a village fete where a prankster swapped sugar for salt in a single teacup, relying on the host's habit of choosing the nearest cup. People are creatures of habit, she said. Miss Vance, perhaps, always took the first glass offered. Or was it placed deliberately for her? Craddock leaned forward. Lydia Price arranged the tray herself. Said she wanted Eleanor's glass to be prominent, centre of the tray, she told us. But she insists she didn't touch the wine itself, just set the glasses out. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to Lydia's agitation, her insistence on perfection. And who else was backstage during those 3 minutes? Mr. Hurst was nearby earlier, I believe, and Mr. Drake was seen near the tent. Miss Finch claims she was at the marquee entrance, but could she have slipped closer? Craddock consulted his notes. Hurst says he was with booksellers by then, and we've got 2 who confirm it. Drake's trickier. A witness saw him near the tent an hour before, but his alibi for the speech is shaky. One bookseller says he was at his stall, another thinks he stepped away briefly. Clara Finch was in the crowd, corroborated by a neighbour, but no one can place her exact movements before the speech. Lydia was backstage the whole time. By her own account, Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, her mind sifting through the details. Backstage, she mused. Such a busy place, yet so easy to go unnoticed in the chaos. I wonder, Inspector, if we might revisit the marquee. There's something about that tray, that moment, that nags at me. Craddock agreed, and they set out for the village green, where the festival tents still stood, now under police guard. The marquee, stripped of its festive bunting, felt cavernous and forlorn, its wooden platform scuffed from the previous day's panic. Miss Marple approached the refreshment table, now cleared of its contents, and pictured the scene. The silver tray, the sparkling glasses, the fleeting window of opportunity. She knelt by the platform, her eyes scanning the grass where Eleanor's glass had shattered. "Inspector," she said, pointing to a faint stain on the ground, barely visible against the green. "The wine spilled here, but is there anything else? A residue, perhaps, from the poison itself?" Craddock crouched beside her, signalling a constable to collect a sample. "Good eye, Miss Marple. Aconite's not likely to leave much trace, but we'll test it. The glass fragments are at the lab. Nothing unusual so far, just standard flutes." Miss Marple stood, her gaze lingering on the platform. "Standard flutes," she echoed, "yet one was deadly. I wonder if the poisoner relied on chance, or if they orchestrated the moment. Mrs. Price's arrangement of the tray, centre stage, as it were, suggests intent. Craddock's brow furrowed. You think Lydia marked the glass somehow? Not marked, perhaps, Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. But positioned. People are so predictable, Inspector. A star like Miss Vance might always take the most prominent glass, trusting it was meant for her. They returned to the village hall, where Craddock shared more details. The aconite, he explained, could be extracted from monkshood, a plant common in English gardens. Our local gardener, Mr. Pym says it grows in his borders, Craddock noted. Anyone with a bit of knowledge could have harvested it. Miss Marple's mind flashed to Julian Drake's admission of researching poisons for his novel Hurst, too, as a publisher might have access to such knowledge, and Lydia's meticulous nature suggested she was no stranger to detail. Clara, though, seemed less likely. Her devotion was emotional, not calculated. Yet Miss Marple knew better than to dismiss anyone. She thought of Miss Pollitt, a village seamstress who once poisoned a rival's tea over a petty slight, her meek demeanour hiding a ruthless streak. As Craddock left to follow up with the lab, Miss Marple returned to her cottage. Her knitting resumed as her thoughts churned. The poison's path was clear. Aconite slipped into a single glass during a brief window, chosen by Eleanor either by chance or design. Each suspect had access, in their way, Hurst's proximity, Clara's nearness, Lydia's control, Drake's knowledge. But motive and method required more clarity. She recalled a village scandal where a stolen necklace was hidden in plain sight, the thief relying on chaos to escape notice. Was this poisoner similarly bold? Miss Marple made a note to revisit the witness statements, particularly those placing Drake near the tent. His envy burned brightest, but Lydia's strain and Hurst's secrets could not be ignored. Clara, too, remained an enigma. Her devotion might hide a deeper wound. As the mist lifted outside, revealing the village in sharp relief, Miss Marple felt the puzzle's contours sharpening. The poison's path was laid, and she was determined to trace it to its source. Chapter 8. A Village Secret. The soft glow of lamplight bathed Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate shadows on the walls as she sat by her hearth, her knitting a steady rhythm in her hands. Outside, St. Mary Mead lay quiet, the festival's tumult now a memory, though its echoes lingered in the village's gossip. Miss Marple had always found gossip a valuable resource, not for its accuracy, but for the truths it unwittingly revealed, like pebbles scattered along a path to a hidden garden. Her conversations with the suspects, Hurst, Clara, Lydia, and Drake, had woven a complex web, but the poison's path remained elusive. Today she resolved to tap the village's undercurrents, seeking the secrets that might illuminate the crime. She began at the post office, where Mrs. Murgatroyd, the postmistress, presided over a counter cluttered with letters and parcels. Mrs. Murgatroyd's sharp eyes and sharper tongue made her a font of village lore, and Miss Marple knew she would have caught whispers of the festival's tensions. As she purchased a stamp for a letter to her nephew Raymond, Miss Marple steered the conversation toward Eleanor Vance's collapse. "Such a dreadful affair," she said, her tone one of mild concern. "I suppose everyone's talking about it." Mrs. Murgatroyd leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "Oh, indeed, Miss Marple. The whole village is agog. Poison, they say, right in the middle of the festival. I heard from Mrs. Tuttle, who was selling scones, that Mr. Drake and Miss Vance had a proper row years ago at some writer's retreat. He accused her of stealing his ideas for her first novel, said she built her career on his back. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly, though her expression remained placid. "How intriguing," she said, tucking the stamp into her purse. "Mr. Drake does seem rather sensitive about his reputation. Did Mrs. Tuttle mention anything else?" Mrs. Murgatroyd's eyes gleamed. "She did say Mr. Hurst was in a state before the speech, arguing with Miss Vance behind the bookstalls. Something about her book causing trouble for his firm. Mrs. Tuttle reckoned he was worried about money. Hurst and Sons isn't what it used to be, you know." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the details. She recalled Hurst's nervous fidgeting, his quick defense of his firm's stability. "And Mrs. Price?" she asked, her tone casual. "She must be under such strain, poor thing, with the festival in disarray." Mrs. Murgatroyd sniffed. "Poor thing, my foot! Her husband's debts are no secret. Owed half the county from what I hear. The festival was her chance to dig them out. But now? I saw her at the bank yesterday, looking like she'd seen a ghost. If you ask me, she's hiding something." Miss Marple thanked Mrs. Murgatroyd and left, her steps slow as she crossed the village green. The postmistress's gossip, though embellished, held grains of truth. Drake's feud with Eleanor suggested a deeper grudge than he'd admitted, while Hurst's financial woes added weight to his unease. Lydia's husband's debts were new to her, but not surprising. Miss Marple had sensed her desperation beneath her polished exterior. She thought of Mrs. Eldridge, a village widow who once hid her son's gambling debts behind a facade of respectability, only to be undone by a careless remark at the church fete. Next, Miss Marple visited the village shop, where Miss Hartnell, a spinster with a nose for scandal, was arranging jars of marmalade. "Miss Marple," she greeted, her voice brisk, "I suppose you're here about that awful business with Miss Vance." "Poison of all things. I was in the crowd, you know, and I saw that Clara Finch girl, clutching her book like it was the Bible. She's odd, that one. Writes letters to Miss Vance, pages long. I heard from Mrs. Baker at the tea-room." Miss Marple's fingers paused on her knitting bag. "Letters, you say? How devoted she must be. Did Mrs. Baker mention if Miss Vance replied?" Miss Hartnell shook her head. "Not often, from what I gather. Clara sent dozens, but only got one note back. She was heartbroken, Mrs. Baker said. Kept saying Miss Vance didn't understand her anymore." "Sounds like obsession to me." Miss Marple smiled, her mind turning to Clara's trembling hands, the word betrayed scrawled in her book. Obsession, indeed, could twist admiration into resentment. She purchased a tin of biscuits and left, her thoughts swirling. The village's gossip painted a vivid picture. Drake's old wound, Hurst's precarious finances, Lydia's hidden burdens, and Clara's unrequited devotion. Each suspect had a secret, but which had led to poison. Returning to her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. She considered the aconite, its source likely local. Monkshood grew and missed her. Pym's garden, accessible to anyone with a mind to use it. Drake's knowledge of poisons, Hurst's proximity to the tent, Lydia's control of the tray, and Clara's emotional volatility all fit the puzzle, but the pieces were not yet aligned. She thought of a village scandal years ago, when a stolen brooch was traced to a quiet housemaid through a single overheard whisper. Secrets, she knew, had a way of surfacing. Miss Marple decided to share her findings with Inspector Craddock, who was due to call later. She jotted down her observations, Drake's feud, Hurst's argument, Lydia's debts, Clara's letters. Each was a clue, but the poison's path required more. A tangible link to the fatal glass. As she wrote, she recalled the stain on the grass, the shattered flute, and Lydia's insistence on arranging the tray. Had someone watched, waiting for Eleanor to choose her doom? The village clock chimed, and Miss Marple set her pen aside. The festival's secrets were like her knitting, tangled at first, but with patience a pattern would emerge. She felt the truth drawing closer, hidden in the village's whispers, ready to be plucked like a loose thread. Chapter 9. The Hidden Clue. The morning sun broke through the lingering mist, bathing Saint Mary Mead in a pale golden light that seemed to promise clarity after days of shadow. Miss Jane Marple, her black shawl draped over her shoulders, walked purposefully toward the village green, where the festival marquee stood like a silent witness to Eleanor Vance's near-fatal collapse. Her conversations with the suspects, Reginald Hurst, Clara Finch, Lydia Price, and Julian Drake, had painted a vivid picture of motives each coloured by ambition, devotion, desperation, or envy. Yet the precise mechanics of the poisoning eluded her, like a stitch dropped in an intricate pattern. Today she resolved to revisit the scene of the crime, trusting that the smallest detail might unravel the mystery. The marquee, now stripped of its festive trappings, felt cavernous and forlorn, its canvas walls sagging under the weight of recent events. A lone constable stood guard at the entrance, nodding as Miss Marple approached. Inspector Craddock had granted her access, recognizing her knack for spotting what others overlooked. She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light, and made her way to the refreshment table. Now bare, save for a few stray napkins and a forgotten program. The wooden platform where Eleanor had collapsed was cordoned off. But Miss Marple's gaze was drawn to the grass beneath, where the shattered glass had spilled its deadly contents. She knelt carefully, her knees protesting slightly, and examined the ground. The faint stain of wine remained, darkened by the damp grass. But something else caught her eye. A crumpled napkin, half buried in the soil, its edge stained with a faint blue residue. Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind racing. Aconite, she knew, could leave such a trace if mishandled, its crystalline form clinging to fabric or skin. The napkin, overlooked by the police in their focus on the glass fragments, suggested a poisoner's haste, a momentary lapse in an otherwise calculated act. She signalled the constable, who retrieved the napkin with gloved hands, sealing it in an evidence bag for the lab. Rising, Miss Marple turned her attention to the platform, picturing the moment of the crime. The tray of glasses, arranged by Lydia Price, had been brought to the stage by Emily Watson. Eleanor had chosen her glass, centre of the tray, Lydia had said, to ensure prominence. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Was it prominence or precision? She recalled a village incident where a tampered pie at a fete was placed just so, ensuring the intended victim took it. The napkin, stained and discarded, hinted at someone acting in the brief window when the tray was unattended. She left the marquee and walked to the village hall, where Inspector Craddock was reviewing statements with a young sergeant. "Miss Marple," he greeted, his face brightening. "You've been to the marquee, I hear." "Find anything?" "A napkin, Inspector," she said, her voice soft but precise, "near the platform, with a blue residue." It may be nothing, but aconite can leave such traces, can it not? Craddock's eyebrows rose. Good catch. We'll rush it to the lab. Anything else? Miss Marple hesitated, her fingers brushing her knitting bag. A thought, perhaps? The tray's arrangement, Mrs. Price's insistence on placing Miss Vance's glass in the centre. It suggests the poisoner knew which glass she would take. I wonder if we might speak to the volunteers again. Particularly Miss Watson Craddock nodded, summoning Emily Watson, who arrived looking pale and nervous. Miss Marple, she said, twisting her hands, I've told the police everything I know. Of course, dear, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing, but sometimes the smallest detail comes back to one later. You brought the tray to the stage, yes? Did you notice anyone near it before you carried it out? Emily frowned, her brow furrowing. It was so busy. Volunteers, authors, all rushing about. I set the tray down backstage near the curtain while I fixed a snag in the fabric. When I came back, it looked the same. Mrs. Price was there earlier, arranging the glasses, but she'd gone to check the microphones by then. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. And no one else? Mr. Hurst, perhaps, or Mr. Drake? I believe they were both near the tent at some point. Emily hesitated, then nodded slowly. I did see Mr. Drake earlier, maybe an hour before. He was by the refreshment tent, adjusting his cufflinks. I thought he was just passing through. Mr. Hurst was there too, checking the setup with Mrs. Price, but that was before the tray was brought out. Miss Marple's needles clicked once in her mind, though her hands remained still. Drake's cufflinks, a nervous habit, or something more? She recalled his cool demeanour, his knowledge of poisons. Hurst's presence, too, was telling, though his alibi for the speech seemed firm. Thank you, Emily, she said. You've been very helpful. As Emily left, Miss Marple turned to Craddock. The napkin, Inspector. Maybe our key. If it holds aconite, it suggests the poisoner acted quickly, perhaps wiping their hands in haste. And Mr. Drake's cufflinks. Such an odd detail to notice. Might we ask if anyone else saw him backstage, closer to the speech? Craddock jotted a note. I'll check with the other volunteers. We've got a witness who places Drake near the tent earlier, but no one's confirmed him backstage during that 3-minute window. Hurst's booksellers swear he was with them, and Clara Finch was in the crowd, though her movements before are vague. Miss Marple nodded, her mind sifting through the clues. The napkin was a tangible link, its blue stain a whisper of carelessness. She thought of Mrs. Bantry's maid, who once dropped a stolen hairpin near a crime scene, betraying her guilt. The poisoner, she sensed, had made a similar mistake, their haste leaving a trace. Lydia's arrangement of the tray, Drake's proximity, Hurst's earlier presence, all pointed to opportunity, but the napkin suggested a specific hand. Returning to her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. The village's secrets had added depth to the puzzle. Drake's feud, Hurst's finances, Lydia's debts, Clara's obsession, but the napkin was a new thread, one that might tie directly to the poisoner. She pictured the backstage chaos, the tray momentarily unguarded, a figure slipping in to taint a single glass. Drake's cufflinks nagged at her. Could they conceal a vial, a sleight of hand? Or was Lydia's meticulous arrangement a deliberate act, masking a darker intent? Miss Marple made a note to share the napkin's significance with Craddock. urging a thorough analysis. The poison's path was clearer now, narrowed to those fleeting minutes, but the motive remained a shadow. As the fire crackled, she felt the puzzle's edges aligning, the hidden clue a beacon in the fog. One more step, she thought, and the pattern would reveal itself. Chapter 10. The Confrontation. The village hall of St. Mary Mead, with its polished oak floors and high windows, stood bathed in the pale light of late morning. A stage set for revelation. Miss Jane Marple had requested Inspector Craddock to gather the 4 suspects, Reginald Hurst, Clara Finch, Lydia Price, and Julian Drake, for what she termed a clarification of details. Her gentle demeanour belied the steel beneath. She knew that truth, like a shy creature, often emerged when cornered. The hall was arranged simply, a long table at the centre, chairs for the suspects, and a smaller table for Craddock and his sergeant, who stood ready with notebooks. Miss Marple sat to one side, her knitting bag at her feet, her eyes as sharp as her needles. As the suspects entered, the air grew taut, each face a mask of unease or defiance. Hurst, his tweed suit slightly askew, mopped his brow with a handkerchief, his eyes darting to the door. Clara, clutching her worn copy of Whispers of Truth, seemed smaller than ever, her gaze fixed on the floor. Lydia, her auburn hair pinned tightly, moved with a brittle energy, her hands clasped to still their trembling. Drake, last to arrive, sauntered in with a cool smile, his silver-streaked hair catching the light, though his fingers toyed with his cufflinks, betraying a flicker of nerves. Craddock opened the proceedings, his voice calm but authoritative. "Thank you for coming. We've new evidence in Miss Vance's poisoning, and Miss Marple has some observations to share. This isn't a formal interrogation, but we need clarity." Miss Marple inclined her head, her voice soft as she began. "It's a curious thing, isn't it? How a single moment can change everything. A glass of wine, a toast, and suddenly a life hangs in the balance." Aconite, the lab confirmed, was slipped into Miss Vance's glass during a brief window backstage when the tray was unattended for mere minutes. It was a bold act, requiring nerve and precision. Hurst shifted, his voice gruff. "I've told you, I was with booksellers." "I didn't go near the tray." Clara's eyes welled up, her voice a whisper. "I was in the crowd, watching Eleanor. I'd never hurt her." Lydia's hands tightened. "I arranged the tray. Yes, but I didn't touch the wine." "I was checking the microphones when it happened." Drake's smile was thin, almost mocking. "And I was at my stall, signing books no one wanted." "You've checked my alibi?" Inspector Miss Marple's needles clicked once. A deliberate pause. "Indeed, your alibis are strong on the surface. But alibis, like stories, can have gaps. Let us consider the facts." The tray held 12 identical glasses, one poisoned. Miss Vance took the centre glass, as Mrs. Price had arranged it to be prominent. A clever touch, ensuring she chose the fatal one. But how was the poison delivered? A napkin found near the platform bore a blue residue. Aconite, the lab confirmed yesterday. Someone acted in haste, wiping their hands after tainting the glass. Hurst's face reddened. A napkin. That could be anyone's. Festivals are messy affairs. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, faintly. "Quite so, Mr. Hurst. But this napkin was near the spilled wine, where Miss Vance's glass shattered. A careless mistake, perhaps. Let us consider who was near the tray. Mrs. Price, you were backstage, arranging the glasses. Mr. Hurst, You checked the setup earlier. Miss Finch, you were at the marquee entrance, close enough to slip backstage. And Mr. Drake, she paused, her gaze settling on him. A witness saw you near the refreshment tent an hour before, and another claims you stepped away from your stall just before the speech. Drake's smile faltered, his fingers stilling on his cufflinks. That's nonsense. I was signing books. Ask the bookseller. Mr. Collins Craddock interjected, his voice steady. We did. Mr. Collins says you left your stall for a few minutes, claiming you needed air. No one saw you return until after the collapse. Drake's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, his jaw tight. Miss Marple continued, her tone gentle but relentless. Aconite requires knowledge, Mr. Drake. Your novel, The Viper's Kiss, describes it vividly, its preparation, its effects. You are bitter about Miss Vance's success, her book mocking your decline. And those cufflinks, she gestured to his wrists. Miss Watson saw you adjusting them near the tent. Could they conceal a vial, perhaps? Drake's laugh was sharp, but it lacked conviction. Cufflinks? You're grasping, Miss Marple. I'm a writer, not a chemist. Clara sobbed softly, clutching her book. Eleanor didn't deserve this. She was everything to me, Hurst blustered. This is absurd. My firm depends on Eleanor. Why would I risk that? Lydia's voice was shrill. I've told you, I only arranged the tray. I didn't poison anyone. Miss Marple's gaze remained on Drake, her voice calm. Envy, Mr. Drake, is a powerful force. Miss Vance's book humiliated you, and her speech would have drawn more eyes to her, away from you. You knew her habits, perhaps that she always took the centre glass, a star's prerogative. You were near the tent, and you slipped backstage during those unguarded minutes, didn't you? Drake's composure cracked, his eyes blazing. You've no proof. A napkin, a witness, circumstance, nothing more. Miss Marple's smile was serene. Proof, Mr. Drake often lies in the smallest things. The napkin's residue matches aconite, and your cufflinks. Such an unusual design. Might the police examine them? Craddock signalled his sergeant, who approached Drake. If you'd oblige, sir. Drake's hand jerked back, but he relented, unfastening his cufflinks and handing them over. The sergeant turned one over, revealing a tiny compartment, empty but stained faintly blue. The room fell silent, save for Clara's stifled sob. Miss Marple's voice was soft, almost sorrowful. A clever hiding place, but not clever enough. Drake's shoulders sagged, his defiance crumbling. She ruined me, he muttered, his voice low. Her book, her smug triumph. It was too much. I just wanted her silenced. Craddock stood, his voice firm. Julian Drake, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Eleanor Vance. As the sergeant led Drake away, Hurst exhaled, Clara wept, and Lydia stared blankly, her hands still. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her heart heavy. Envy, she thought, was a poison as deadly as aconite, corroding the soul. The village hall emptied, leaving only the echo of truth revealed. Chapter 11. The Confession. The village hall, so recently charged with tension, now lay quiet, its high windows admitting the soft glow of a late afternoon sun. The confrontation had left an echo of unease, like the fading notes of a struck bell. Miss Jane Marple remained seated, her knitting bag at her side, her eyes resting on the empty chair where Julian Drake had sat moments before. His defiance shattered by the discovery of the stained cufflink. Inspector Craddock, his face a mix of relief and grim satisfaction, lingered near the door, conferring with his sergeant as they prepared to escort Drake to the police station. Reginald Hurst, Clara Finch, and Lydia Price had been dismissed, their expressions a tangle of shock, relief, and lingering fear. Miss Marple, however, sensed that the puzzle, though nearly complete, required one final thread to secure its pattern. Craddock approached, his notebook tucked under his arm. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low, "you've done it again." That cufflink was the clincher. The lab will confirm the residue, but Drake's reaction was as good as a confession. Still, I'd like a formal statement from him. Will you join us at the station? Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression serene. Of course, Inspector. People often say more than they intend when pressed, don't they? I find it helpful to listen. They arrived at the small police station on the edge of St. Mary Mead, a modest building with ivy creeping up its stone walls. Drake sat in a sparsely furnished room, his hands cuffed, his once polished demeanour replaced by a haggard intensity. His silver-streaked hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, no longer mocking, held a mix of defiance and resignation. Miss Marple took a seat near the wall, her knitting in her lap, her presence unobtrusive yet commanding. Craddock sat opposite Drake, a constable at the ready with a notepad. "Mr. Drake," Craddock began, his tone even, "you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Eleanor Vance. We've evidence. Aconite residue on a napkin, your cufflink's hidden compartment, and witnesses placing you near the refreshment tent. Care to explain?" Drake's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the table. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by the faint scratch of the constable's pen. Then, under Miss Marple's steady, unyielding gaze, he exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping. "She ruined me," said, his voice low and bitter. "Eleanor Vance, with her smug little book, her rise to glory while I was left in the dust. Whispers of Truth wasn't just a novel. It was a dagger, aimed at me." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythm to anchor her thoughts. "You felt humiliated, Mr. Drake," she said, her voice gentle but probing. "Her book painted a character so like you, a failed writer, clinging to past glories. It must have been unbearable." Drake's eyes flashed, meeting hers. Unbearable? It was a public execution. I was the darling of the literary world once. Awards, reviews, packed readings. Then she came along, stealing my ideas, my style, and passing it off as her own. That retreat years ago, I told her about a novel I was planning, a satire of our world. She took it, twisted it, and made it hers. Whispers of Truth was my idea, and she mocked me in it. Craddock leaned forward, his voice sharp. "So you poisoned her to silence her." "How did you do it?" Drake's fingers twitched, as if still reaching for his cufflinks. "I'd read about aconite for the Viper's Kiss, its speed, its subtlety. I got it from a garden, not hard to find if you know where to look. Monkshood's common enough. I ground it into a powder, kept it in my cufflink case, a trick I learned for research, hiding props for authenticity." His lips twisted in a bitter smile. "The festival was my chance. I knew Eleanor's habits. She always took the centre glass, the star's prerogative. When I saw the tray unattended backstage, I slipped in, sprinkled the powder, and wiped my hands on a napkin. I didn't expect it to be found." Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind was sharp. "You were so careful, Mr. Drake, yet so careless. The napkin, discarded in haste, betrayed you. And the cufflink, such a clever hiding place, but it left a trace. Drake's laugh was hollow. I thought I'd planned it perfectly. 3 minutes, that's all I needed. The chaos backstage, Lydia fussing, volunteers running about, no one noticed me. I wanted her humiliated, not dead. Just enough to stop her speech, to make her falter. He shook his head, his voice dropping, but it went wrong. I misjudged the dose. Craddock's pen paused. You admit to poisoning her glass? Drake nodded, his defiance gone. Yes, I wanted her to feel what I felt, exposed, diminished, but I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to stop. Miss Marple's needles stilled, her heart heavy. She thought of Mr. Grayson, the village shopkeeper who once sabotaged a rival stock out of envy, only to regret it when confronted. Envy, she knew, was a poison of the soul, as deadly as aconite. You resented her success, she said softly, but it was your own bitterness that trapped you. Mr. Drake Craddock stood, signalling the constable. That's enough for now. You'll be charged with attempted murder, Mr. Drake. Anything else to add? Drake shook his head, his eyes distant. Only that I'm sorry it came to this. But she pushed me too far. As the constable led him away, Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her thoughts turning to the village. Drake's confession had closed the circle, but its ripples would linger. She recalled a young man in St. Mary Mead, driven to theft by jealousy, his remorse too late to undo the harm. Drake's regret, she sensed, was genuine, but it could not erase his act. Outside, the evening air was cool, the village settling into its quiet rhythm. Craddock walked her to her cottage, his voice warm with gratitude. You've a gift, Miss Marple. That napkin, the cufflink, you saw what we missed. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes distant. People are so predictable, Inspector. They leave traces, not just in napkins, but in their actions, their fears. One only needs to look. As she entered her cottage, the fire's glow welcoming, Miss Marple felt the puzzle complete. The poison's path, the hidden clue, the confrontation, all had led to this moment. Yet she knew the village would talk, weaving new stories from the scandal. She settled by the hearth, her knitting resumed, ready for the next thread life might bring. Chapter 12. The Festival's End. The sun dipped low over St. Mary Mead, casting a soft amber glow across the village green, where the last of the festival tents were being dismantled. The air, crisp with the promise of autumn, carried the faint scent of crushed grass and fading roses. Miss Jane Marple stood in her garden, her pruning shears in hand, though her attention was less on the late-blooming asters than on the events that had unfolded over the past few days. The literary festival, once a beacon of village pride, had ended in scandal. But with Julian Drake's confession, the shadow of poison had lifted, leaving only the quiet hum of resolution. Miss Marple clipped a wilted bloom, her thoughts as precise as her cuts. The case had been a tapestry of human frailties, envy, ambition, devotion, and desperation, each suspect a thread woven into a pattern only she had discerned. Drake's act, born of a festering grudge, reminded her of Mr. Tuttle, the village gardener who once sabotaged a rival's roses out of spite, only to regret his pettiness when exposed. People, she mused, were so often their own undoing, their motives as clear as day to those who watched closely. The village was already weaving new tales from the scandal. At the post office, Mrs. Murgatroyd spoke of Drake's arrest with relish, while Miss Hartnell, at the shop, speculated on Eleanor Vance's next book. Miss Marple, however, preferred the facts. Eleanor, recovering in hospital, was expected to make a full recovery, her brush with death only fueling interest in whispers of truth. Sales had soared, and Hurst and Sons, despite Reginald Hurst's earlier fears, stood to profit handsomely. Clara Finch, her devotion unshaken, had sent a bouquet to Eleanor's bedside, while Lydia Price, though shaken by the festival's near ruin, was already planning next year's event. Her husband's debts a lingering concern, but no longer a secret. Miss Marple returned to her cottage, settling by the fire with her knitting. The familiar click of her needles was a comfort, a rhythm to anchor her reflections. The case had been solved, the napkin's residue, the cufflink's secret, Drake's bitter confession. But it left her with a familiar pang. Human nature, she thought, was like her garden, beautiful in its order, yet prone to weeds. Envy had driven Drake, just as it had driven others she'd known. A maid who stole a rival's locket, a shopkeeper who spread malicious rumours. Each act, small or grand, stemmed from the same root. A heart turned inward, unable to bear another's light. She glanced at the village green through her window, now empty save for a few stray leaves skittering across the grass. The festival had come and gone, its drama a fleeting storm in St. Mary Mead's quiet life. Yet Miss Marple knew that peace was never permanent. Another puzzle would come, as surely as the seasons turned. She thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry, who once remarked that trouble followed Miss Marple like a shadow. "Not follows, Dolly," she had replied, "but waits to be seen." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's needles moved faster, her thoughts already drifting to the next thread, the next knot. "People," she murmured, her voice soft in the quiet room, "are so very predictable." With a final stitch, she set her knitting aside, content for now, but ever watchful for the mysteries that lay just beyond the horizon.